Hi everyone, Small here. Today we are talking about Tragodia, also known as Phantom Altar, the standard 6-star operator who's expected to drop on global around mid-November. Now, Phantom has been around for a long time. He first showed up way back in 2020 as the very first 6-star executor specialist. Back then, he was likely a solid unit. But time is not always kind in Arknights. With the monsters like Texas Altar and Kirin Yato entering the scene, poor Phantom got left in the dust, struggling to keep up in both damage and crowd control. Fast forward to 2025, Phantom is back. And this time, he is not playing around. With his Altar version, he's here to flip the meta on its head with a super cohesive laser-focused design. He's built entirely around crowd control, locking enemies down and keeping your team safe. When it comes to control effects, he's hands down the best in the game right now. As the centerpiece of max risk CCB4 clears, Tragodia stands tall as the undisputed king of crowd control. So let's not waste any time. Let's dive right into Tragodia's kit and see what makes him such a must-pull operator. Alright, let's kick things off with Tragodia's Archetype. He's part of the Ritualist branch under the Supporter class, the same one that Virtuosa belongs to. And if you've played with the Virtuosa before, you already know the deal. Each Ritualist specializes in applying a specific type of elemental damage. Virtuosa focuses on necrosis, while Tragodia is all about nervous impairment, a brand new elemental damage type that dropped with the 6th anniversary. Now, I'm gonna skip the long lecture about how elemental injury and elemental damage work, we have all been there. If you need a refresher, check out my YUE review. The short story is that elemental injury from Ritualists completely ignores res and damage reduction, which makes them fantastic for triggering bursts on high-res enemies like elites and bosses. So what exactly does nervous impairment do? When a burst is triggered, the enemy instantly takes 6000 elemental damage, which, to be fair, is on the low side compared to something like necrosis. But that's not the point. Nervous impairment isn't about melting HP, it's about control. After a burst, the target gets 3 stacks of paralysis, shown as a little grey lightning bolt over their head. Each stack cancels one normal attack the enemy tries to make. You literally see them shudder and twitch when it happens, and the lightning bolt depletes as stacks get used up. Now, there are a few key things to keep in mind. Paralysis only stops normal attacks. If an enemy uses a skill, it'll still go through. And as usual in Arknights, figuring out what counts as a normal attack versus a skill is, let's just say, guesswork. For example, Sarkaz Devours use a skill to eat your operators, but Man-Eating Flowers from IS-5 don't, for some reason. Even the wiki isn't super clear, so it's one of those try it and see situations. Also, if an enemy's attack hits multiple times, like Patriots, which strikes 4 times in one swing, all those hits get shut down by a single paralysis stack. Paralysis stacks don't expire on their own unless the enemy has effect resistance. In that case, they lose 1 stack every 5 seconds. If you burst again a target already paralyzed, you'll refill the stacks back to 3, which is the max. Since the burst cooldown is about 10 seconds, the ideal targets are slow, hard-hitting enemies. Think bosses with long attack intervals. You can completely shut down most of their normal attacks. Usually, you'd bring a Ritualist to set up bursts for other operators who capitalize on them for more damage, like Primal Casters. On CN, they even released Mantra, a nervous impairment primal caster, so Tragodia can totally fill that enabler role too. But honestly, he doesn't need anyone else to shine. The real strength of nervous impairment lies in control, not damage. Tragodia can hold his own just fine, locking down whatever threat dares to move, while your team wipes the floor with everything else. Alright, let's move on to Tragodia's talents, starting with talent 1. This one lets Tragodia deal 30% of his attack as elemental injury to his main target and 20% to any enemies nearby. Just like I mentioned earlier when talking about his archetype, the elemental injury scales off Tragodia's attack stat, not his damage. That's why it completely ignores res and damage reduction. Now, if this sounds familiar, that's because Virtuosa has a somewhat similar first talent. She can also inflict elemental injury within her range, but Tragodia's numbers are way beefier, meaning he can trigger bursts much faster on both his main target and the enemies clustered around them. That said, Virtuosa's talent hits every enemy in her range and even applies a small 0.2 second slow to each one, so in massive swarm situations she's got the upper hand. But honestly, swarms aren't really where elemental damage shines anyway. Their defenses are usually paper thin, so you don't need elemental damage to deal with them. What matters more is triggering burst on the important enemies, the tanky elites and bosses, and in that department, Tragodia's talent absolutely delivers. Now let's talk about Tragodia's second talent. Whenever an enemy is hit by a nervous impairment burst, their attack speed gets reduced by 12. In simpler terms, that means they're attacking at about 88% of their normal speed. This debuff actually works hand in hand with paralysis. The slower an enemy attacks, the longer those paralysis stacks stay active, and the longer Tragodia keeps them completely under control. Even without considering paralysis, that attack speed debuff alone is a nice damage suppression tool. Fewer attacks per second means less incoming damage for your team and more breathing room for your healers. What's even better is that attack speed debuffs stack additively, all the way down to a minimum of 10 attack speed. That means you can combo Tragodia's debuff with other operators for some nasty results. For example, Scylla can lower attack speed by 10 in her surrounding tiles, while a Thorn's Altar can passively shave off up to 10 attack speed. And Pramanix can even go wild with a brutal -60 using her skill 1. The second part of Tragodia's talent is also useful. Every time an enemy in his range performs a normal attack, they take 70 points of elemental injury. Now, 70 isn't a massive number when you need 1000 elemental injury to burst a normal enemy or 2000 for a boss. But it's still a great way to punish fast-hitting enemies. They might burn through paralysis stacks faster, but the more they attack, the quicker they'll trigger another burst and get paralyzed again. When Tragodia launched, it came with his X module, which takes this talent up a notch. The module boosts elemental injury against elites and bosses by 18%, increases the attack speed debuff from 12 to 20, and raises the elemental injury of the second part of the talent from 70 to 90. You can really feel the difference. With the module equipped, Tragodia can trigger bursts much faster on bosses like Patriot, while also keeping paralysis stacks up longer. That extra stall time means the boss can't break free as easily, giving Tragodia just enough breathing room to cycle into another round of skills. If you don't have any dupes, I'd highly recommend raising Tragodia to level 88 with the module level 2 or level 82 with the module level 3. Either setup lets him burst elite enemies in 5 attacks, and most importantly, lets him trigger a burst on bosses with just one cut explosion from skill 2. A noticeable power spike that really improves his control game. Alright, let's get into Tragodia's skills. And here's something cool. Each one brings a different kind of crowd control to the table. For skill 1, that's Bind. Skill 1 is fully automatic, so it's a solid AFK option. Just set it and forget it. When it activates, Tragodia launches a double-hit arts damage attack, and most importantly, binds the target for 3 seconds. While bound, enemies also take extra elemental injury, so you are locking them down and building toward a burst at the same time. The skill also has some smart targeting built in. It prioritizes enemies not under burst, which might sound like a small thing, but it's a nice bit of quality of life. This fixes one of the biggest issues from the first ritualist, Wuthering, who would waste attacks on targets still on burst cooldown. Virtuosa got this QOL treatment too when she was released, and Tragodia keeps that same upgrade. Now, the main reason to run Tragodia skill 1 over something more damage oriented like Virtuosa skill 1 is the bind. So let's break down how good its uptime really is. Skill 1 is an offensive recovery skill with just 2 SP cost, meaning Tragodia can bind enemies roughly every 4.8 seconds. Since the bind itself lasts 3 seconds, you're already flirting with perma-stall territory. If you boost his attack speed by around 60, that gap closes completely, dropping the cycle from 4.8 to 3 seconds, basically perma-binding enemies. You can easily hit close to that number with something like Monster Skill 2. For comparison, Chubai would need over 110 attack speed to achieve the same thing, so Tragodia is way more efficient here. And if you're running him in IS-5, getting plus 60 attack speed isn't that hard. The King's Relics alone give plus 50 attack speed plus bonus SP gain, which already pushes you into perma-stall territory. It's also worth noting that very few enemies are immune to bind, only a handful, like Kristen's first phase and the IS-4 ending 2 boss during his dash. Overall, skill 1 is probably Tragodia's weakest. It's single target and doesn't bring massive range. But don't underestimate it. That near constant bind uptime makes it a legit stalling tool, especially for tough enemies or bosses you just need to freeze in place. And let's be real, most people are gonna M9 Tragodia anyway, it's just that busted. Alright, now let's talk about Tragodia skill 2, easily one of the most interesting and creative skills in the game. This skill has infinite duration, but don't be fooled, it's not really an AFK skill. After charging up 25 SP, it auto-activates, giving Tragodia a permanent plus 35 attack speed buff and a slightly larger radius for his talent 1 elemental injury spread. But the real star of the show, the cat summon. Once the skill activates, Tragodia can summon a cat for 5 DP, and you can drop it on any ground tile, even outside of Tragodia's range. When you drop the cat, it creates a diamond-shaped lure zone around it, and up to 4 enemies within that area, with priority given to elite and boss enemies, will get baited into walking toward it. Basically, they just have to go pet the kitty. When an enemy gets close enough, the cat explodes, dealing arch damage and elemental injury to all enemies in the area, plus applying a 6-second slow. And yep, every enemy in that radius gets hit, not just the ones that were lured. Even aerial enemies aren't safe. Here's a nice quality of life touch. Even though it's not shown on screen, the cat's redeploy timer starts the moment you place it, not after it explodes. Its redeployment time is also just 25 seconds, so you can use it pretty often. The cat will keep luring enemies for up to 10 seconds unless one reaches it first. So if an enemy takes 10 seconds to walk over and another 10 to walk back, you've got about a 5-second window before you can drop another cat, even less if you factor in that 6-second slow. In theory, that puts you very close to perma-stall territory. Of course, that depends on the enemy's movement speed. For something to take 10 seconds to move 2.5 tiles, it needs a movement speed of 0.5, which isn't super common. So in messy real-world stages full of mobs at different speeds, the cat usually explodes before hitting the full 10 seconds of lure. True perma-stall is a bit tricky in practice. You can improve uptime with Silver Ash, since his talent shortens redeploy times. And in integrated strategies, there are relics that cut redeploy time even more, making perma-control absolutely doable. On the flip side, Contingency Contract sometimes adds tags that increase redeploy time, which can make using skill 2 a bit rough there. Another cool trick: you can manually retreat the cat and it will instantly explode. Super useful if you just need a burst of damage to delete a stray mob, or if you want to quickly apply paralysis to ease the pressure on your backline. Also, any enemies currently being lured become unblockable, which means you can temporarily pull aggro off your defenders. Very handy in tight situations. One thing to remember though, for enemies to be lured, there has to be a valid path from them to the cat. You can't bait enemies across separated lanes or through walled-off tiles. It follows the same logic as YUE's teleport skill. The only real downside of this skill is the initial warm-up time. But honestly, compared to other infinite duration skills, it's pretty tame. Overall, this is Tragodia's go-to skill. Between the map-wide cut placement, solid AoE range and the respectable damage, skill 2 gives you both control and flexibility. And since Lure is a brand new type of crowd control that hardly any enemies are immune to, kind of like Nymph Sphere, it's an incredibly strong tool. On top of that, any skill that messes with enemy pathing is automatically busted in Arknights. Just look at how many wild strats became possible thanks to YUE's teleport. Even ignoring the control aspect, simply being able to reposition enemies, like dragging them into your DPS range, makes this skill pure gold. Alright, time for the big one. Tragodia's skill 3, easily one of the wildest control tools in the entire game. When you activate this skill, Tragodia's attack range expands massively, matching Virtuosa's skill 3 range. On top of that, he gains a juicy plus 125% attack buff, and just like with skill 1, he'll prioritize targets not under burst, so you are always spreading your control as efficiently as possible. Enemies hit during this skill take some elemental injury DOT, and their burst recovery rate increases by 50%, meaning the burst cooldown drops from 10 seconds to just 6.7 seconds. That's huge. A shorter cooldown means more bursts, more elemental damage, and most importantly, more paralysis stacks. But that's not even the best part. Every time a burst triggers on an enemy, a purple cage spawns beneath them, and these cages come with some crazy mechanics. Here's the rundown. Cages block any blockable enemy, no matter what block count that enemy has. They've got 3 hit base HP, meaning they can take exactly 3 attacks before breaking, doesn't matter how strong those hits are. Also, the cages can only be attacked by the enemy they are blocking, not by anyone else. These cages perfectly synergize with paralysis. The enemy tries to break free, but their attacks keep getting interrupted by the paralysis stacks. Just when they finally burn through them, Tragodia's reduced burst cooldown kicks in, and boom! Another burst, fresh paralysis, a new cage, and the cycle starts all over again. It's basically an infinite stalling loop. And the elemental injury during this skill isn't bad either. Within its 30-second duration, Tragodia can trigger around 3 bursts on a boss. Even better, the cages don't vanish when the skill ends, they stick around for another 30 seconds, buying you time to recharge. You'll need it, because this skill costs 40 SP. Not cheap, though still lighter than other CC giants like Suzerain or Mostima. If you want to speed things up, Suzerain is actually perfect for this. Her talent gives plus 0.4 SP per second to all supporters. Otherwise, you can always rely on your favorite SP batteries. Now, a few quirks you should know about. The cages can spawn under aerial enemies, and yes, those enemies will be blocked. It's one of the very few ways to block flying units, and Rose Montis absolutely loves it. The cages can even appear on undeployable tiles, like the red boxes. And here's a subtle one. When an enemy gets caged, they are pulled toward the center of their tile, unlike when they're blocked by a normal unit, which usually pushes them outside the tile. So don't be surprised if enemies look like they're snapping back into the tile when the cage appears. The only real weakness here is unblockable enemies, since cages don't spawn beneath them. But everything else, even enemies with big block counts, gets completely shut down. That's especially wild when you consider how critical 4-block operators like Hoshiguma with their Y module can be in certain stages. Tragodia just does it all by himself. In short, Skill 3 is a monster. It locks movement, cuts damage pressure, and completely negates anything blockable for at least 30 seconds. That's exactly why it was a core piece of max risk CCB4 clears on the Chinese server. For everyday content, you'll probably stick with Skill 2 since it's more flexible and you can spam it more frequently. But don't skip out on Skill 3, it's absolutely worth the investment. Alright, let's bring this home with the proper wrap-up. So, Tragodia, what a unit. Let's go over his main strengths first. Tragodia's design is totally unapologetic. He's laser focused on one job, control, and he does it better than anyone else in the game. Whenever a stage calls for a CC specialist, whether it's to lock down enemies or suppress their damage output, Tragodia will be your go-to pick. He's stacked with multiple forms of control, most of which are rarely affected by immunity, making them premium tools for high-end content. Skill 2 is especially cracked. Since his little cat can be dropped anywhere on the map, costs only 5 DP and doesn't use up a deployment slot, even Texas Alter might be out of job now. Kinda poetic, considering Texas Alter was the one who forced OG Phantom into early retirement. Then there's Skill 3, which takes things to a whole new level. The combination of paralysis and hit count based HP cages lets him tank some of the strongest attacks while keeping enemies locked down. In CCB4, the ability to block even 4-block enemies made him essential for max risk clears. Honestly, beside Texas Alter, even some defenders might want to start polishing their resumes. And let's not ignore how effortless he is to play. With Skill 2, you can drop CC and damage anywhere on the map. With Skill 3, you can completely lock down enemies for half a minute. Everything is incredibly simple and powerful with Tragodia. Having strengths with little to no compromise, new players will feel right at home using him. Now, when it comes to weaknesses, we are really splitting hairs here. The guy barely has any. Even his damage, which isn't his main selling point, can hold up surprisingly well against someone like Virtuosa, especially with Skill 2. But alright, let's nitpick a little. First, fast-hitting enemies can quickly burn through some of his control tools. Mild spoiler warning, skip ahead if you don't wanna see this boss from episode 16, timestamp is in the description. Still here? Cool. So yeah, this boss attacks like a machine gun, shredding through paralysis stacks and cage HP like it's paper. Even with Skill 3's cooldown reduction, Tragodia just can't keep up. Also, remember that enemy skills ignore paralysis, so that's another limitation. Then there's a potential long-term issue. As more elemental damage operators get added, their effects can interfere with each other, since only one type of elemental injury can trigger a burst at a time. If Hypergraph keeps releasing new busted elemental units, and let's be honest, they will, Tragodia might not age quite as gracefully as some other control specialists. Finally, his IS performance has been a little unlucky. In IS-6, he shares supporter vouchers with Radiant and Haruka, making him harder to draft. And some new IS-6 enemies, including the Ending 4 boss, are immune to Skill 2's lure, which doesn't help his case. Meanwhile, in IS-5, Tragodia has a hand. In lamp runs, depending on your strategy, that might be a deal breaker. And honestly, without much attack speed those runs give, even a low rarity unit like Ethan can handle most of your control needs. That said, Tragodia was still among the top 11 most drafted 6-stars in the 3G Cup on the Chinese server this June, so he's definitely viable for Talon runs if that's your thing. Now, as for pulling recommendations, it almost feels silly to say, yes, you should pull for him. Tragodia is arguably the strongest 6-star on the horizon, and it's not even close. He's a must-have for both daily and high-end content. And hey, credit where it's due. Props to Hypergrave for actually listening and putting a key elemental damage enabler on a standard banner for once. That said, because Tragodia is a standard operator, you'll still have chances to get him later. And let's be honest, we are right in the middle of a broken operator gauntlet that started with Monster, so your pulls might already be running dry. If pulling for Tragodia means skipping an upcoming limited unit, think carefully. Skipping limiteds, especially collab units, is always a gamble. Just ask the folks who skipped Ela for Wishadel. They're probably crying now that Exusia Alter is here and loves units with huge ammo pools. So yeah, don't just look at who's strong right now, think about who may become strong later. Anyway, that's enough from me. Hopefully, this breakdown helped you understand just how absurd Tragodia really is. Thanks for watching, and as always, see you in the next one.